Good afternoon, folks. Just as we're waiting for people to trickle in, we might do a quick sound check. If you could just raise your hand if you could hear me, I'd appreciate it. Perfect. Thanks, folks. Good afternoon, folks. You're very welcome joining us this afternoon for our webinar. My name is Greg Stanley, and I'm Director of Platform Solutions with SmartSimple. I'm joined today by some of my colleagues from the Platform Solutions team, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves in a moment's time. Today, we're going to be looking at requesting revisions and how the platform can help you handle those. We're going to be incorporating some notes, statuses, and of course, the annotation mode in our presentation today. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items, of course. A reminder that the webinar is being recorded. If you registered, you will receive a link to the recording after it has been processed, and we'll also be posting it on our YouTube channel in about a week's time or so once it has been edited. Of course, we love to hear your questions, so feel free to pop them into the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll, of course, answer them at the end of the session. If for whatever reason you think of a question after the session is ended, please feel free to reach out to the Platform Solutions team at platformsolutions@smartsimple.com. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Banky, and he can get the show on the road. Banky, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Greg. So my name is Banky, and I'm a member of the Platform Solutions team, and I'll be talking about revisions requested using the statuses and notes. I'll start by sharing my screen. And I'll also minimize my camera for more screen bandwidth. Alrighty, so SmartSimple in general, has different ways in which you can validate some recent submissions of applications in your entire system. However, there's some times that you might require or request some additional revisions or changes to be made to applications. So for example, I'll just go into a record that has just been recently submitted and is going through a review process. Once maybe a staff member or a system administrator has gone through all the different sections, tabs, fields, questions in this application, if they notice that there are some changes needed to be made, they can go ahead and unlock some fields that might have been locked, or flag some fields that still need to be updated, and then use the statuses to flip this record back to a different status requesting for revisions. And to do that, what I've done is I've gone ahead to create a nice little button to do the flipping for me, which would change the status of the current record from being under review to a different status known as the revisions requested. And so the statuses and the buttons are very specific to the particular universal tracking application being used. In this case, the application manager. So I'll go into the application manager's configuration system settings to let you know how to create those buttons and statuses. Since we're dealing with the level 1 record, which is the application, the general settings for those statuses and buttons would be under the general settings for level 1, and also subsequent levels for level 2s, which would be the activities, and the level 3s, which can also be disbursements or other level 3 activities that you have in your system. So I'll focus on just the level 1s for now. I'll start off with the statuses. And to create a new status, as with anything new in the system, you just need to click on the plus button and then go through it. But I've already created this new revisions requested status, so I'll just go through the settings that have been configured for this particular status. As you can see here, we've given it a name and a caption. And the display order just determines where in the list of all your statuses this particular status is going to be displayed. We've given it a nice description as well. You can decide to include this status in the group and add a nice little tooltip. You can also color code the statuses just to differentiate it from other statuses. And you can put a lock on the status where, changes won't be made or modifications can't be done unless it's being approved by someone like a system administrator, for example. And then if you go into the permissions and availability tab, this is where you basically set any roles and permissions that are available on this particular status, who can override locks on the status, what particular application types, which are the level 1 record types that this particular status is available under. As you can see, I've listed a few different types that it's available under. Once that's done, you can go ahead and save it. And then going back into the settings, this is also where you create the submit button that would trigger or switch the status from being, say, under review, for example, to being back in the revisions requested status. So if I go ahead and click on this, this is where all of my save and submit buttons have been created. And then if I go into the request revisions button that I mentioned earlier, again, you've seen that we've selected the type of button it is, given it a nice little caption, and you also determine where or what status the record has been switched from. So in my example, it's switching the status from being under review to being in the revisions requested status. And you can even set up a situation where it triggers like a workflow, for example, where it notifies the owner of the record or the user that needs to make those changes, like the actual applicant, to let them know that they need to make those said changes and update the particular application, and then they can send it back to you once that's done. Another useful feature that I wanted to talk about today was the notes feature. And so notes in SmartSimple are like ways to communicate on different types of records. That could either be like an application or even like an organization or a user profile on like different, say, workflows, events, really anywhere around the system. You can add notes just to communicate about that particular record. And since it's so global, the notes are actually created, the note types, I should say, are created within your global settings. So I'll just click on the 9 square menu on the top right here to go into my global settings. And then the note type configuration is under the system configuration, where you can manage all the different note types in your system. So if I click on that, again, to create a new one, you just need to click on the plus button on the top left. But I'll just go through some of the ones that I've created in my system. I've created one and named it an internal note. And this particular note is one that's only visible to the internal staff members, like a grant staff or a system administrator, for example. And so again, we've given it a nice name, caption, also color-coded it to differentiate it from other note types. You can even make it a high visibility note where the note will always appear on the top of the record without having to go into the notes tab to view that particular note. And then if I scroll through my various notes using the arrows on the top right corner here, you see I can use the note to applicant as another example. This particular notes applicant has been configured slightly differently. Yes, we've given it a nice little name and caption and also color coded it. But if we go into the permissions and availability tab, you see that it's visible by more users in the system rather than just the internal note that's visible to only the grant staff or the system administrator in this example. And so you can also trigger some processes or workflows using the notes as well. So in this example, the note to applicant, if I go ahead and go into the process tab, I can select a workflow that I've already created in my system that's supposed to send an email acknowledgement to the particular applicant. So if I go ahead and open the workflow settings, you see in the list of tasks that it's actually sending an acknowledgement email to the particular applicant to notify them that a note has been added to their record or to their profile, and you can even configure it to also include the contents of the note as well. So I'll show you an example of what that can potentially look like. If I go into, say, another example of, or the same example of an application, and then the notes will always appear in the left-hand side of the records pertaining to this particular application. So if I go into the notes tab, I can go ahead and create a new note. Again, in the list of types, it will display all the note types that you have in your system. So if, for example, I create a note to the applicant, I just say, please update your profile, for example, and I flag some fields to be updated. I can do that and save. And once it's been saved, if there's any workflows that are associated with that note, that particular note type, it can, like I said, maybe send a notification to the applicant, notifying them that there has been a note added to their profile or to their record. A few other things to know about the notes is, as you can see here, you can filter by different note types. So if I had multiple notes, some people use notes a lot and they add a lot of notes to different records in their system. So if I had like tens or hundreds of notes, I can filter by type. Depending on what type of note it is, I can filter by date as well, when it was added. And you can even decide to sort by newest to oldest or oldest to newest. There's a nice little print preview button that prints all the notes or gives you a print preview of all the notes in this particular record. And as you can see on the notes, it also contains the date and time that the note was created. It lets you know what type of note it is. It obviously shows you the contents of the notes. It lets you know who created the note. And there's also a nice little edit button on the right-hand side, just to either like edit or delete the particular note that has been created. So those are the two features that I wanted to talk about today, which are the note types and statuses, just to communicate or request revisions on records in SmartSimple. And now I'll pass it on to Garrett to talk about the annotations feature.
Sure thing. Alrighty, I'm going to share my screen now. And we are now looking at a record in the system. And I'm going to be talking about annotations today. So Banky was mentioning statuses, of course, submit buttons, as well as notes. And those are great for communicating with our external users, with our internal users, with really whomever you would like to be communicating with in the system. And also, of course, we can drive processes using those statuses and using those buttons. However, notes are sort of record specific. They are not field specific. So when it comes to calling out revisions in the application, you're going to have to refer to the field by name within the notes. And we actually have a nice feature called the Annotations feature that is field specific and allows us to highlight particular fields in the record and, of course, request revisions, maybe request elaborations on some of these responses, and even send messages pertaining to the fields on the records as well to our internal staff, but also to external or our external users, but also to internal staff rather. So as far as using the annotations feature, let's have a look at what that actually looks like in the system. Here I'm in a record that's in under review status. And when it comes to annotations, we can allow for them to be opened automatically. So we can actually enter annotation mode automatically when we enter a record. That's part of the settings of the annotation, or we can allow it to be toggled on manually. So up here on the top right of a record, you'll see this annotation mode toggle. And if we go ahead and turn that on, you'll see that we now enter annotation mode, and we have this nice window up here at the top to let you know we are in annotation mode, and we can click on a field for annotation options. So as an internal staff, we can go through and maybe request a revision. You'll see that annotations that already exist on the record will be highlighted. So we can see that there are annotations against these fields in particular. Let's say that we'd like to request some revisions on this field in particular. We are going to select that field simply by clicking on that field or the caption. We are going to click that new annotation button. And here you'll see we can select an annotation type. If we have multiple annotation types that are permissioned to our role, we'll be able to select them from this dropdown. However, since I'm an internal staff member, I only have my staff annotation available for me to create. And I can include a message here, like, please elaborate on this particular response. And when we're done with our message, we can click save. And it will then be saved in the Annotations tab that you'll find in the left menu of this record. So it's nicely organized for you, similar to the notes that are also on the left menu of the record are the annotations. When we're done with annotating the record, we can of course exit annotation mode, and we can also of course push it to another status. So we're going to use this in conjunction with our statuses and with our buttons to ensure that we have a nice process flow with our annotations. So firstly, like I mentioned, we can find this annotation in our annotations in the left menu, and to push it to our request revision status, of course, like Banky mentioned, we can have our nice button. So we can request revisions. We could include an alert that we have to confirm here before we actually request revisions. And then we have a nice landing page for that button as well that was set in the submit and save button settings that Banky has shown. So we have now requested revisions on this particular application. We can have a workflow associated with the revisions requested status that will notify maybe our grantee or the owner of this record, alerting them that changes have been requested on this record, and they can log in to make those changes. So let's have a look at what the grantee might see. So let's go ahead and navigate to a grantee here, and I'm going to emulate their session. And you can have a list of all of the records that are in revisions requested status available on the portal of whomever you'd like it to be available for. So this is a role-based portal here. So for our grantees, we're going to include this on our grantee portal, and it's included in a list view filter for this list view here, which is our current applications that we should work on. You'll see we have this application here that's in revisions requested status. That's the one we just sent for revisions. So we can now open that up. And you'll see here that I've actually set the annotation so that it automatically opens in annotation mode. You can see up here, we're in annotation mode already. So we can go ahead and flip through the record here, and you'll see that we have highlighted annotations. We can select one of these to respond to this particular annotation. So we have this reply and modify button, and I can now include a message as well as modify my field value. And when we use this in conjunction with our field revision history, we can have a really nice audit trail of not just the revisions themselves, but also us requesting revisions, and they'll all be saved against the record. So really great for auditing purposes. You'll see for our annotation type here, we have applicant feedback as our type, and that has its own permissions associated. I'll be showing you how to set these up in just a moment. When we are done, of course, we're going to click save, and that's going to send that annotation back. And then we can also have a nice button on this revisions requested status, such as this submit revisions button that is going to send it back into maybe a revision submitted status. So we're using those statuses and those buttons still to drive the process here. And of course, we can workflow enable or we can use workflows to ensure that after these revisions have been submitted, maybe we alert an internal staff member via email or SMS. So I am going to actually show you now how we're going to set up annotations in our system. So annotations are similar to notes in that we're going to find them in the global settings. So we're going to select the configuration menu here, the 9-square grid. We're going to go to our global settings. And in this system tab here, we're going to scroll down to the system configuration header, and you'll see that we have annotation types available right here for us to select. So let's select the annotation types, and you'll see that I've configured a few, and we've demoed these. So you know the purpose of these particular types here. But just to reiterate, I do recommend creating a separate annotation type per stakeholder or per role that's going to be creating these annotations, so we can have nice categorization and we can have permissions associated with each. So our staff annotation is available for staff to create, and our applicant feedback is of course available for the grantees or the applicants or external users, and we can create different annotation types for different roles in our system. So to create a new annotation type, we're going to click this new type button that's signified by the plus sign that you see here. But let's just go ahead and look at the staff annotation one that I've already configured so we can see how we've set it up. So here you'll see, of course, we've given it a name and a caption, of course. We can also include the display order, so it can be shown in a particular order in the list of our annotation types. And you'll also see a description. I always recommend including a description for some context and to also let your other system administrators know why this exists, what it's for, and of course, its purpose. So we can also include a color code for this one. And then the real meat and potatoes of the annotation type here is really going to be in the permissions. This is the most important part to get correct, is to ensure that the individuals that you'd like to allow to view these annotations can see these annotations. And also the roles that you would like to allow to create these annotations can create them as well. So you can select them here using the dropdown. You can click in and select. We can also deny creation as well. And when we have those settings exactly how we'd like them to be, we are going to click Save here. When it comes to our applicant example, we are allowing the creation of these particular annotations to organization contacts, which are our grantees in the system. So they have that permission, and we're going to save that as well. So we have these annotation types, but now we actually have to enable annotations for a status in our UTA. So if we're going to enable this on our application, like what I've shown in my example, we're going to go to our application manager, or maybe our submission manager, or our grants manager. It really depends on the nomenclature of your system. It will likely be one of those. So let's go into our application manager here, and let's go into the UTA configuration settings that are going to be up here with the gear icon. Just like Banky mentioned, we're going to go to the level entity tab. So level 1 is going to be here on the second tab from the left. Level 2 is going to be the third, and level 3 will be the fourth. We're going to go to our statuses, and we are going to enable it on a status. So on that under review status that we added our staff annotation to, we are going to add that annotation permission. So let's go ahead and edit the status. And we are going to go into the permissions tab, and we're going to scroll down for this annotation system role permissions. So here you'll see that we've allowed for these roles to view and create the annotations in this status. And in our revisions requested, if I actually navigate to the revisions requested here, you'll see that we also allow for our grantees to create annotations here. So we've also updated the settings within that status as well. And we save when we're done. And what you'll find is after we have enabled these settings on these records, we will then be able to add those annotations on a record. A few settings to note here in the status permissions tab here is you'll see that we also have the ability to open in annotation mode. So I mentioned previously, we can either toggle it on or set it to open automatically. And here on the status is where we actually are going to configure that and allow it to open in annotation mode. You'll also see this Anonymized Creator, and that's very useful when it comes to internal staff, including annotations on a record. You can anonymize the identity of that particular internal staff user. So it will say that that annotation was added by another user, and it will protect their identity. And I would recommend, of course, anonymizing maybe your internal staff members when it comes to those annotations. When you're done, of course, click Save, and they can create those annotations. So that was a quick look at annotations. It's very useful. And you can, of course, use those alongside notes to ensure that you can communicate with your applicants. You can request revisions effectively. And of course, we're going to use our statuses and our buttons as well to ensure that we have that process down pat. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share here and go ahead and pass the mic back to Greg.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Garrett. Thanks, Banky, for a great presentation. I hope everybody online found that informative. A couple of questions that have come through. The first was already answered via text by Banky, but just to add a little bit of one additional comment from myself. So the question was, can notes be deleted once made? The answer is, of course, yes. However, it's only the individual that writes the note that can actually delete it. So that's something to keep in mind when you are creating those notes. Second question there, can you add notes to a list view also for Banky there?
So no, you can't actually add notes to list views. However, you can maybe create a report that sort of mirrors the information being displayed in the list view, and then you can add notes to that particular report. Yeah, absolutely. So given the nature of notes being a large text box, they don't particularly lend themselves quite well to a list view. But you can of course build a report to extract all of that data in a list fashion.
There is one comment around using both deny and allow permissions. It is, of course, best practice and generally easier to maintain just using either allow or deny. There are cases, as you seen in our demo environment, where you may want to be explicit. So if you're allowing certain roles, but just to be extra sure that you don't want to give accidental visibility to somebody, you can, of course, be explicit in your deny permission. But it can be easier just to maintain if everything across the board is all allow or all deny rather than the combination of the two. So thank you very much for calling that out. And just a couple of other comments really from myself around best practices, some key things that both Garrett and Banky mentioned. Making use of captions versus making use of the names within configuration. Always useful to add nice descriptions as well, to give additional context to yourself, your colleagues, your future colleagues around the configuration changes that have been made. One other question that's come through there around the difference between the submit, save draft, and the save and validate buttons, again for Banky there.
So the save draft button basically does not necessarily go through any validations that are on that particular record, and it still saves the information or the data that has been added into it. And then there was also the submit, right? I don't actually see where the question is.
Yeah, it's a save and validate and a save draft button. So save and validate will run all of the validation on the form, but it won't change the status. So that's the difference between the submit and the save and validate. Some eagle-eyed viewers as well may have also noticed a sneak peek of our upcoming upgrade. Again, just around best practices, positive actions on submit buttons to the right, negative options to the left, and there was a sneak peek there of some nice colored buttons that will be coming down the line, so that you can add, a nice big red button for a delete or a negative action as an additional warning. Some additional comments coming in. You can, of course, toggle on and off the showing of the company name as notes on the global settings for organizations. And there is one additional question there as well coming in. If you want staff to add annotations for an applicant and for reviewers, do you need two different types of annotations? So Garrett, over to you for that one.
Sure, yeah, so you would not need to. What you would actually need is just to include view permission for both of those roles, and then they would create that one annotation that would be visible to both roles. So that would prevent any duplication of the effort, and also you wouldn't have to create an extra type.
And that also goes for notes as well. You can define view-only permissions for an entire role for specific notes too. So although you can define the permission on a note type by note type basis, you can also do it globally as well. And following on from the annotation, if you didn't want applicants to see your annotations to staff, would you need a different type? My answer there would be yes. If you didn't want to expose those, you would need to permission those appropriately, so that if it's just an annotation to staff or just a note to staff, and you had a separate purpose then for your applicants, you would need two separate ones for that purpose. With a couple of minutes remaining, if there are no more questions, we can wrap it up. As always, folks, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to attend the webinar. We appreciate the questions. If you think of anything after the set, we have one in here. Can you pull annotations into the email to the applicant asking for revisions? I love the idea, but I'm not sure if the feature is intuitive enough for grantees. That is a good question. Garrett, have you an answer for that, or do we need to take that one offline?
Haven't tested that one personally, but that's definitely one that I'm excited to try out and get back to you later.
Yeah, perfect. We'll take that offline and we'll respond to that particular question. And as always, folks, emails to platformsolutions@SmartSimple. Oh, another one here. We created a summary field for the staff to complete, and we merged that into an email. That's a good use case. You can also, we didn't actually mention, so in that summary field, which is a simple multi-line text field, there is the ability to turn on note entry mode, which will give you a threaded message, which could then be pulled in. So it's a multi-line text field with note entry mode toggled on, allows you to expand on the functionality of the multi-line text field. So a good comment there that's coming. Any final passing remarks or parting remarks, I should say? Great. I think we've ticked all those boxes. Thanks again to my colleagues, Banky and Garrett, and thanks to all of you for your time for attending the webinar. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.